You think passing your exams is going to feel like a finish line, not in a big dramatic way, not like everything suddenly clicks into place, but enough that something settles. Like things will finally make more sense to you, or like you'll feel a bit more grounded in what you're actually doing, or like the constant second guessing will start to slowly stop. You expect some sort of shift, more clarity, more confidence, more control over how you're moving through the work. And for a minute, it almost feels like that. You passed, you got through something that took potentially years. You closed a loop that had been sitting in the background the whole time. And then there's this part where you think, all right, good. That part's done. And then something else shows up. And it's not what you expected at all. The questions don't get easier, they actually start to get heavier. And the conversations you have don't get clearer, they start to open up even more. And the answers, they don't arrive the way that you thought they would. No one hands you a new playbook. No one sits down and says, hey, now here's how this works. You finally made it. If anything, it feels like the opposite. You start noticing that people expect you to hold things differently, not just complete tasks or not just respond to comments, and not just to move something forward and then pass it along. It's deciding. And that's where it shifts because nobody feels more ready after they take their exams. You just feel more exposed to what happens next. You send an email and then it carries further than it used to. Or you answer a question and it just doesn't resolve something, it sets direction too. If you let something sit and it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. Before this, there was space between you and the outcome. Someone else checked it, someone redirected it, or someone absorbed the risk before it moved on too far. Now, that space is thinner, and sometimes it's just gone altogether. And no one really explains that part, so you fill it in yourself. I should know this now. I shouldn't still be asking this. Why does this still feel unclear? You don't say it out loud, but it's there. The pressure to perform like something just clicked, but nothing clicked. What changed isn't what you know. It's where your decisions land, and they don't stop where they used to. They travel. And when they travel, they carry. You didn't get clarity. You got responsibility. And responsibility doesn't feel like a reward at first. It feels more like weight. You're listening to The Practice of Practice, a podcast for architects, designers, and emerging professionals navigating the gap between school and real work. We focus on the realities most people only learn through experience: workflow, judgment, responsibility, and time. It's not theory, it's practice. Before licensure, your work moves through people. You're not working in isolation, you're part of the process. You're contributing, learning, and building reps. But there's distance. You draw something, someone reviews it, you respond to their comments, and then somebody else makes the call. There's a consistent rhythm to it. You're involved, but you're not fully carrying the outcome yet. There's a layer between you and what happens next. And if something is off, it usually gets caught. Or if something's unclear, somebody else might define it. If something carries risk, it gets filtered before it moves on too far. You still feel the work, but you don't feel the consequence of it. And that's not a flaw in the system. That just is the system. Because early in practice, your job is exposure, repetition, pattern recognition, seeing how decisions actually play out over time. We've talked about this, but not absorbing every downstream effect of those decisions. Then something shifts, and it doesn't announce itself. Nobody tells you, hey, you passed, you're responsible for more now. No one marks the moment where things change. You start noticing that things look different. You send something out and it doesn't come back. Not because it was perfect, but because it was accepted. You answer a consultant and no one rewrites it. They let it stand. You make a call and the project moves with it. That's where it starts to feel different. Not all at once, but enough that you start to notice. The buffer is thinner. The part that isn't clear enough is that before this, something or someone was catching your mistakes. After this, they're not. It's not because they stopped caring, and it's not because they're trying to test you. It's because they're watching something else now. Not just the way you produce, but how you carry it. Do you notice when something feels off? Do you say something before it actually becomes a problem? Do you follow through without being reminded to follow through? Do you close a loop or do you just let it sit? That's what's being evaluated. And if you don't see that shift, you misread the pressure. You think you're supposed to suddenly be more capable because you've gotten licensed, more certain, more complete in how you think. That's not what changed. What changed is the reach that you have. Your decisions, they don't stop at your desk anymore. They move. They move into coordination, into consultant work, into client conversations, into construction eventually. It's the same task, just a different consequence. And then once you feel that, even a little bit, the small things stop feeling small. An email isn't just an email anymore. It sets direction. A quick answer isn't just a response you gave. It now locks something in. A loose assumption doesn't stay contained. It spreads into other parts of the work. And that's where the weight comes. Not because the work is harder, but it lands differently. So when you start feeling that tension, that sense that things carry more than they used to, that's not you falling behind. That's you feeling the structure of practice different and more directly. You're closer to it now. It's less filtered. You're more exposed to consequence, and that's not comfortable, but it's accurate. People get stuck here because no one explains what this phase is supposed to feel like to them. So you start to explain it to yourself, and you get it wrong. You decide that now you're supposed to know. Not everything, but more than this, more than the questions you're still asking, more than the uncertainty that you're still feeling. You draw a line in your head. Before this, it made sense to ask. Now, I should already know. And once that line shows up, everything tightens. You hesitate before asking something simple. You rewrite emails that didn't even need rewriting. You hold back in meetings even when you see the issue. Not because you don't care, it's because you don't want to be wrong. And it feels responsible, like you're holding a higher standard. You're not. You're just slowing yourself down. Because the expectation at this stage isn't certainty, it's ownership. That's the shift. Before, asking a question was about getting an answer. Now, asking a question is about bringing something with it. A read, a direction, a point of view. That's why the responses don't change. You don't get "it depends" or "what do you think?" You're not past that. You're just expected to do something with it. Move. Not perfectly, not definitively, but clearly enough that something progresses. This is how I'm reading it. Or this seems to be the constraint. Or this is the risk I see. That's what people are listening for. Not whether you're right, but whether you're thinking. Whether you understand what's actually at stake. Whether you can move something forward without pretending it's fully resolved. The part that matters is this. You can do all of that and still be wrong. That's not a miss. That's the job. Because in practice, the goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty. It's to carry it without hiding it. Make it visible, to move with it, to not pretend it isn't there. If you wait until you're certain, you won't move at all. And if you don't move, things will stall. And when things stall, someone else steps in and moves it for you. And that's what people notice. Not that you asked a question. It's that you didn't carry anything with the question. So the pressure you're feeling, it isn't about what you know. It's about whether things move when they reach you. And once you see that, the hesitation will start to change. You stop trying to eliminate uncertainty. You start working with it. Judgment starts to begin there, not from knowing, but from deciding anyway. The answers, they don't get better. They just get more expensive. It's the same ambiguity, the same it depends, or the same incomplete information. But now something has to move anyway. You're sitting in a meeting and something comes up that isn't fully resolved. Before, you might have just sat there and noted it and let it sit and then assumed that someone else would pick it up somewhere else. But now there's a pause. Not a dramatic pause. No one calls on you, but it's there. And if no one says anything, nothing happens. And then the conversation just hangs, so someone has to move it. And most of the time, that someone is you. Not because you're the most experienced or you're the most certain, but because you're there. And waiting doesn't move anything. So you say something. Not perfect, not final, but enough to give it direction. And that moment feels small. It's not, though, because this is how responsibility actually shows up in practice. It's not the big decisions. It's the small ones, repeated daily. You don't take control of the project. You don't suddenly become the decision maker. You just start carrying direction in pieces. You answer something, you interpret something, and you decide how something moves forward for now. And those directions either hold or they don't. And when they don't, nothing breaks. There's no big failure most of the time. Things just start to loosen. A detail that felt resolved gets revisited, or a coordination item circles back, or a conversation that felt closed opens again. No one can point to the moment it went wrong, because nothing went wrong. It just wasn't held long enough to stick. That's drift. Most people misread it. They blame communication or coordination or missed details, and sometimes that's true. Most of the time it isn't, though. Most of the time it's because no one carried the decision far enough. It was made, sure, but it wasn't reinforced, not followed through, or not made visible enough to hold. So it gets reinterpreted, adjusted, or reopened. And now you're dealing with something that didn't need to drift in the first place. And that's where your role changes. You can keep things open. You can play it safe and stay flexible and avoid being wrong. Or you can hold something just enough to move it forward. You say, like, this is how I'm reading this. Or, I'm proceeding this way unless we hear otherwise. Or, this needs confirmation before we go further. It's nothing aggressive and it's nothing locked. It's just clear enough that something actually moves. And that's the part that feels unnatural to you at first, because it feels like you might be overstepping. Like you're saying something that isn't fully resolved. Like you might get corrected. And sometimes you will. That's not really the problem. Not holding the direction is the problem. Because when nothing gets held, everything stays in motion. In motion without direction turns into friction. It creates more meetings, more back and forth, more time spent redeciding things that were already decided. So the shift isn't about having better answers. It's about not leaving everything open. So what does holding responsibility actually look like? And this part nobody actually formally teaches you, because it doesn't look like anything is actually changing. It doesn't come with a title. It doesn't come with an announcement. And it doesn't feel like a step forward when it starts. You don't wake up one day and think, I'm handling responsibility differently now. You just start noticing that the way you communicate shifts slightly. You stop leaving things as open-ended as you used to. Not because you're trying to control everything, but because you've seen what happens when nothing gets held. You've seen how things drift now, how decisions reopen, and how something that felt settled comes back around. So you start tightening how you move things. You start being more clear. You send fewer emails that could mean 5 different things. You stop writing things like just noting or for awareness when something actually needs direction. You start saying what you're doing with it. This is how I plan to move this forward. Let me know if there's a concern, otherwise, I'll proceed. Something simple. But now something has shape, and shape is what keeps project from stalling. This isn't about being right. It's about leaving everything unresolved. And once you start doing this, you'll start noticing something else. No one tells you to. There isn't a moment where someone says, you're now responsible for holding this. It just becomes obvious that someone needs to do it. And if you don't do it, it doesn't automatically get picked up. It just stays loose. And that's the part that catches people. They're waiting for permission, for clarity around their role, for confirmation that they're allowed to take that step. It doesn't come. What happens instead is more subtle. People just stop stepping in. They stop rewriting your emails for you. They stop redirecting every decision. And then they stop jumping in as quickly to clean things up. They're not disengaged. They're still watching. They're thinking to themselves, can you carry this without it falling apart? And if you don't step into that space, nothing breaks. The project still moves, but it moves with friction. There's more back and forth, more clarification, and more time on the same decision. We keep talking about this. And over time, that builds. Not into failure, into weight. The projects get heavier. You have longer conversations, and then you have a lot more effort to get to the same place. So if people ask what changes after licensure, it's not what you do day to day. You're still probably drawing and coordinating and responding, but it's how firmly things move through you. Do they pass through loosely, or do they leave with direction? That's the difference. And it's where people get it wrong. Holding responsibility is not authority. You don't need to be the final decision maker, and you don't need to control all of the outcome. You don't need to be the most experienced person in the room either. You just need to make sure that something doesn't get dropped, that it moves from a question to a path of direction, even if that path changes later. That's the job. Not dominance, not certainty, continuity. Making sure that the project doesn't lose shape as it moves. And when you start doing that consistently, people will notice. They won't have a conversation about it, or they won't make some big thing about it, but they're just starting to trust that when something moves through you, it doesn't drift. And that feels heavier than you expected it to. And it's because it is. There isn't a clean version of this phase. There isn't a point where everything suddenly feels organized and clear and under control. You're making decisions without the full context. You're carrying outcomes you didn't fully define, and you're being evaluated on things no one explicitly explained. That combination creates friction, internal friction. You finish something and then replay it. Should I have said that differently? Did that land the way I thought it would? Was that the right call or just the fastest one? You reread messages looking for the tone, or you sit in a meeting and feel the gap between what's being said and what actually just got decided. You start noticing things you didn't used to notice. Not just the work, but the movement of the work. Where something shifts, where something gets interpreted differently, and where something doesn't quite hold. And that awareness doesn't feel clean. It feels more like pressure. Because now you can see where things can go wrong. You can see where something might drift, where something might get misread, or where something might come back later and bite you. You don't always know what to do with that yet. So you just carry it. And that's a weight. It's not more tasks. It's more awareness. People misread this. They think it's discomfort, and it means they're not ready. They think that if they were further along or more experienced or better at this, it wouldn't feel like this. And that's not the problem. Your discomfort is the signal. You're closer to how it actually works. Not the simplified version, not the filtered version, but the real version. And the real version isn't clean. It's layered, incomplete, and dependent on people interpreting things the same way, which they don't always do. That's the structure. So when you start to feel that tension, that sense that things are slightly unsettled, it's not you falling behind. That's you seeing more of what's actually happening. And there's a point where that starts to shift. Not all at once, because not everything becomes clear, but it becomes familiar. You've seen this type of situation before. You made a similar call. You recognize a pattern just a little bit faster. And instead of freezing in it, you move. Not perfectly, but with the intention. And that's where judgment forms. Not from knowing everything, from seeing enough to stop waiting. There's your transition. From needing certainty to being able to move without it. And until that builds, it feels unsettled and a little heavier than expected. And it probably feels like a little more responsibility than you feel ready for. That's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. If this doesn't feel clearer, that's not a mistake. If it feels heavier than you expected, that's the shift. You didn't get answers, you got responsibility. And responsibility shows up before you're ready for it. Every time. It doesn't wait for clarity. It doesn't wait for confidence. It doesn't wait for you to feel settled into what you're doing. It just shows up. And once it does, things will move differently. Your decisions don't stop where they used to. They carry. They affect other people's work. They affect timing. They affect coordination. Sometimes they move before you feel ready for them to. And that catches people. You're waiting to feel ready, but the readiness doesn't come. Responsibility does. So if you keep waiting for things to feel clear, you hesitate in moments that actually need movement. You leave things open that should have been held. And over time, that shows up. Not as failure, as drift. So the shift isn't about becoming more certain. It's about becoming more stable in uncertainty. Being able to say, this is how I'm reading this. This is the direction I'm moving this in. We'll adjust if needed, but this is where we are. That's what stabilizes things. Not perfect answers, direction that holds long enough to move something forward. And if you can do that consistently, you start to feel something change. Not loud confidence. Something smaller, something quiet. Things that don't feel as reactive. Decisions don't feel as heavy. You don't replay everything as much. Because you're not trying to eliminate uncertainty anymore. You're starting to work with it. And that's when people start to trust you differently. Not because you're always right. Because things don't drift when they move through you. And that's reliability and what reliability looks like in practice. Not perfection, stability. And when responsibility becomes real, a different problem starts to show up. Not what to do, how things slowly come apart. Because projects don't fail all at once. They don't break in a big moment. They loosen, a little at a time. Through decisions that weren't held, through direction that wasn't reinforced, and through things that felt close enough in the moment. And when you start seeing that pattern, you can't unsee it. You start noticing where things slip, where things reopen, or where things weren't actually resolved, just moved past. And that's where practice shifts again. Because now it's not about making decisions. It's about holding them. And that's where we're going to go next. This podcast only works if it gets passed along. Not because of me, but because the hardest parts of practice are usually learned in isolation. If this episode put words to something you've been struggling with, share it with someone earlier in practice, or leave a comment naming the moment that hit. I'm doing this because I remember how long it took to realize that I wasn't behind. I just wasn't being taught. Most of what feels like a personal failure in this profession is actually a shared pattern. The more we name those patterns, the faster we all get better. I'll see you in the next one.